It's okay. These books suck anyways.
It was a good time. Hello, I'm Mariah.
Hi, I'm Kristen.
Welcome to our very first episode of Literary Liberation.
You can find us on all of our social medias at Literary Liberation on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, at LitLib Podcast on Twitter.
For this first episode, we're going to be tackling one of the
most popular,
quote unquote, dark romance books to grace social media. BookTok specifically.
Yeah.
And that is Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton.
I think it's... Oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was going to say, before we get into it, maybe we should go over the trigger warnings
yes.
of this book, because it was...
I have the book pulled up from the book if you want me to read it out.
Go for it.
The contents are very dark with a triggering situation such as non/dub con between the main characters, graphic violence, human trafficking, stalking, child trafficking, child sacrifice, and mentions of child death and explicit sexual situations. There are also particular kinks such as gunplay, somnophilia, bondage, and I can't say that one. You know how to
degradation.
Yeah, that one. And well, I guess we'll be talking about the duology. We're not just talking about Haunting Adeline. We're talking about Hunting Adeline, the second one.
Yeah, because Kristen,
I haven't read it.
And
I'm not going to.
Not reading it.
I predicted this book. I could probably predict the ending of the other one too.
And I think the listing of trigger warnings for that one is even worse.
Really?
It is significantly worse than this book.
I think I have it on my Kindle. I can look to see what those ones are, just in case there's anything that was not mentioned before. But I definitely want to mention this book is not for the faint of heart. It is very...
I find it interesting that this is one of the go-to books that people recommend when it comes to dark romance. Rather than like Twisted Love by Anna Huang. I think that's what her name is.
Yes, I know.
Because that's considered like dark romance. But once you start with something like Haunting, and once you start with this book,
this is I think the first dark romance I've ever read too.
It's getting thrown in the deep end.
I don't really read dark romances though. Like I used to be more of a romance reader, I guess, but especially this past year, I think me and you both have definitely like fallen off the deep end into like BookTok fantasy. Mostly
that you know of.
Well, I know you read like 1 million books a day. So, but here is the trigger warnings for the second book. It says this book contains very dark triggering situations such as graphic rape. There is also graphic violence and gore, torture, sexual assault, kidnapping, psychological abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, explicit sexual situations, human trafficking, slave trade, grooming, severe PTSD, and very particular kinks such as blood play, knife play, degradation, and somnophilia. This book is significantly darker than the first. I'm not reading it either. If I would have had to pay for these books, I would not have bought them. That's my, I think this might be my lowest rated book this year. I have to check my story graph, but I think, which is, I think, very interesting because Mariah, you rated it very highly.
You know, having some perspective.
I rated it 2.5 stars.
I think I originally had rated it like a 5-star, but looking back at it, I probably would. I had never read anything like it. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. But now, looking back, I probably wouldn't rate it that high. I'd probably rate it like a 3 or 4, just because like the writing style of it is not the greatest.
I don't know. It's just also a big pet peeve of mine to like any book that's like first person point of view. Like it's just so like infuriating to me. Like the way that like, I don't know. I just feel like the way the like people think in like books is not like, I guess, consistent with how I think in my own head. So then like reading someone's thoughts feels so like cheesy almost. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like it just feels like, and then I noticed that the walls were a beautiful scarlet red, just like the red from the blood that was dripping off my chest or something. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, nobody's thinking like this whenever they're like actually in like a terrible situation. You know what I
Some of
mean?
them, like, definitely does read kind of like a CW TV show.
Yes. I saw like a TikTok that was actually like talking about how like a lot of BookTok is sort of like CW TV shows, and I don't think it's any hate to any specific BookTok book either, because like, I mean, like, these are some of the most well-known TV shows like Supernatural, Riverdale. Like, these are some of the most profitable TV shows of like all of history that everyone watches. You know what I mean? It's just, to me, it almost feels like a train wreck. Like, you just have to like, you can't look away. Do you know what I mean?
It does. It's very like immersive though. Like
Yeah.
as bad as it is, like I was very sucked into it. I could not put it down. I
I
sat
I
for
read
like 3 days and I think I read both of them and they're both
I
quite
read the
long.
first one pretty quickly. I think I read it in like a weekend. It says I finished it. I have to see. Let me check on my Goodreads. Because I know I read the first one really quickly, but I remember I was texting Mariah my live updates of this book. And like, I was like halfway through and I was like, then whenever like basically the big twist or whatever, I was like, this is exactly what's going to happen. And it was exactly what happened. And so I was like, wow, big mystery book for me. You know, like, it's just like, I don't know. I feel like it's almost like,
It's very predictable. A lot
yes.
of what happens, like you can anticipate it coming. And I think a lot of it has to do with it being, I mean, H.G. Carlton's only been, like, her first published piece of work was in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So, I
When
mean, in
did this
5 years. 29? I think it came out in 2020. I
Okay.
think.
But I think one thing that we could mention too is that H.G. Carlton is Cuban. We're assuming because they have like a Cuban flag in their bio on some of their social medias, on her social medias. Does she use she, they, she, her pronouns? I'm
I think
assuming.
so.
But so I'm wondering if like the fact that like maybe her family is from Cuba, moved to the United States, and then just so happens begins writing QAnon fan fiction, basically is what I would consider this book series. It almost like doesn't paint her in a very positive light in my eyes. Do you know what I'm saying? Like how
Yeah, because I don't think everything I've read in regards to like the controversy surrounding like it being like a QAnon like fanfic is why she put the disclaimer at the front of the
she didn't even
first book.
have that at the beginning.
No, because a lot of what like when people brought it up, she's like, "Yeah, I have no idea. I
That's
never heard of like lizard people running the government." I was like,
such a
but
lie.
it's to the T of
Literally, like everything about
everything.
like the human the children sacrificing and stuff like
Drinking
that.
children's blood.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe I don't know like how much you want to like go into like the story and stuff before we go into like straight spoiler territory, because I guess since you know, I know like basically the basic story is that Adeline is a writer who basically is at like, she starts off at like one of her like book signings or something. She's supposed to be like a very well published author, and she is at a book signing or whatever, and then Zayd, the main male character, sees her and like instantly falls in love with her, and it's supposed to be like a stalker romance sort of type
Yeah, it's
book.
constantly described as like a cat and mouse, which I don't know if that's like a
I don't know.
colloquial term, but I have really only ever seen it associated with
I
this book
think
duology.
it's just associated with this because I know he like calls her like my little mouse, like stupid shit all the
So
time.
maybe this was like one of the first ones, but
I don't know.
I can't substantiate
Especially
that.
if this came out in like 2019 or 2020, I feel like, especially because like the fact that this has only been getting big, I'd say maybe in the last year or so, this book specifically, because I feel like also like BookTok has never been as big as it is until now. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I know like as like Sarah J Maas is another like big book talker. I know she wasn't like the most she was like the most like the highest rated Goodreads author, I think, starting in 2016 or something to like 2022 or something like that. And I'm sure like Rebecca Yarros, the Fourth Wing author, is like probably going up there because like next big thing or whatever.
Yeah, and I remember going to like Barnes and Noble and whatnot, like I don't know, even like a year ago, and I don't remember seeing like BookTok made me buy, but now every table I go to says like a different thing. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I wonder, well, because I know like, and then like I know like this is like, it's so crazy to me that this is like the dark romance that everyone pushes and recommends and stuff like that, when this is literally probably like, I mean, I'm assuming like, I haven't read any other dark romances, you have, but I'm assuming they're less problematic than this one specifically, just because with it being like a QAnon thing, because I feel like it's like stalker romances and stuff like that, I don't feel like are really necessarily anything new, just because like I feel like you see that in movies all the time with like Stockholm syndrome and stuff like that. I mean, like people are like, oh, Beauty and the Beast is like a Stockholm syndrome like story, you know what I mean? And just like with this series, it's so much more than just a stalker romance. It's like a horrific romance. Like this is like traumatizing almost, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, so I imagine we're gonna shift into the spoilers.
Yeah, do
I
you
feel
like put that, like, it's so hard to talk about this because like it's this is definition of like watching a car crash happen. Like this is something that like I hated this book the whole time I read it, but I still read the whole first book just because like I would be like, I have to like see what's happening, you know what I mean? Like I just couldn't like look away. And I read it, it said I read it from the 23rd, it said, to the 27th of June.
I think I read it in like January or February
like
of this year.
Yeah, so but it didn't take me very long. I mean, it's almost 600 pages of like torture porn. You know what I mean? And so like I feel like I gave it a 2.5 stars, and the only reason why I gave it that high of a rating is because I think some of the smut scenes, not all of them, definitely not all of them, some of them were decently like they were, I think, well written enough where you're like interested in just like the smut. But I don't think anything in this book, like you're not reading this book to like have like an intellectual like stimulation. You're reading this because you want to read some fucked up porn.
Pretty much. It's kind of like if you've ever seen Midsommar.
Yeah.
You know, like how you can't take your eyes away.
I did not. That scene when he's bashing that head in, I did not look at that. I could not.
But it's like you watch it and it's like a thought experiment, like coming from an outside perspective and like having media literacy. But I can analyze it, but it worries me that a lot of young girls are getting into dark romance as a category, and this is being recommended, and then Zayd is being put on a pedestal as like a feminist icon for opening up like this child commune for like human trafficking victims, and he's like this savior of women, but meanwhile he is like assaulting and psychologically manipulating Adeline.
I mean, and the thing is, you know what's crazy to me is that reading the trigger warning for the second book and reading the trigger warning for the first book, I don't think she mentioned rape as one of the trigger warnings for the first one, when I would argue he very clearly rapes her in the first book too.
And I think it's a problem to label it as non-consensual and not just for what it is.
Because like that's something that you're into, which is something that you can like consent to like on your own time with your own partner in your own like thing. But in this, there's no, I feel like, clear consent ever like portrayed in that. And I think especially like with young readers and stuff like that, where this is like on BookTok, where, and I think a majority of probably BookTok is like young adult women and stuff like that. And even though like these are two consenting adults, portraying that in a way that's not consensual is going to make a younger person see this and be like, oh, I want to be taken advantage of, sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like that's all like,
because there are ways of writing like CNC and dubious consent, and this is not an example of that until like the second book. But even the second book, she's been groomed into believing that Zayd is the love of her life because he will literally never leave her alone, and he makes that abundantly clear. Like he's not a good person, and he admits to it.
And like in the first book too, he's like, I'm a terrible person, blah blah blah, I don't deserve her, but I'm still going to assault this woman, stalk this woman, and basically get my way as like a man taking advantage of a young woman in a very compromising situation where she lives alone and she doesn't have many friends, she doesn't have like a strong support system within her family. I mean, it very much talks about how like abusive her mom basically was to her, whether or not it was not physical, it was definitely like verbally assaulting that she was. And so I think with Zayd like very much taking advantage of that, it's portrays such a negative light, I think, on what like we as women, like this is like the opposite of like a feminist book. You know what I
Very
mean?
much.
And
very much so.
I think for entertainment it's fine, but I think the issue is that like without having the proper like context of it, where like people that don't actively like consume like media and like the same way we do as like Marxists and stuff like that, where they're like reading this as like, oh, we're viewing this as like a train wreck, but then somebody else who's more like less experienced with the world can view this as like, oh, this is the ideal like candidate for like what I want in my love life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like exactly like highlights what is so important about being principled in like feminist literature. And I know it's like it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. Like
It's
to take the
not.
time to read nonfiction, even though I get nonfiction can be very, very dry, it is so incredibly important before you're like consuming media, especially if you consider yourself a feminist.
That's why
to
I'm
like
wondering, like, I don't know, because, like, I don't know, because I feel like that's one thing that I feel like BookTok does not go into very much is, like, the political specter of, like, anything. Like, I mean, look at, like, Rebecca Yarros, the fourth being, like, the most popular book pushed on BookTok right now. Like, anybody that's an Akatar fan, blah, 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 should read, like, this controversial author that's literally, like, pushing for, like, the military-industrial complex and stuff like that, and then, like, pushing forth this person that's, like, writing QAnon fiction. Like, this is straight up, like, with the ways that, like, with it's, like, very clearly anti-Semitic, you know what I mean? Like, being like, "Oh, the Jewish people are ruling our government, and that's why, like, our country's so fucked up," you know what I mean? And then it's just, like,
mm-hmm.
very anti-Semitic, like, stereotypes that are, like, even though she's saying, like, "Oh, this is not real," she didn't even have that in the beginning, so I don't know, like, if she, like, consumed this media, I was like, "Oh, that would make a good story," sort of thing. I don't know enough about her as, like, a person or, like, as an author.
I don't know. She doesn't really post on social media much because I tried to do some reading into it when I had originally read it and I could not find anything
I just feel
about
like
her
it's just, like,
politics.
this is me being such a, like, overcritical, like, Marxist, but seeing that, like, Cuban flag in her bio and then seeing this is what she writes, it very much gives me, like, Castro, like, ruined my family's life, blah, 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 he took our slaves away, so you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that's her specifically, but I can definitely see that, like, I feel like, or at least with most, like, Cuban Americans or, like, people that have moved here from Cuba, they're usually their families were the ruling class in Cuba, and that is why they chose to leave Cuba, is because they lost so much of that political stance and positive that they had as capitalists on that country that was obviously horrible for the working class and the poor people there. And so, like, it's just like the vibe. This is not me, like, I did this research, you know what I mean? It's just like the vibes of that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you just
Yeah, because
see.
it's weird to see somebody right with that background, and we know about like Batista and like the child sex brothels in
Yes.
Cuba pre-revolution, revolutionary like Cuba, to write something of this nature is a little concerning. It's
Yes.
weird because I've noticed because I did read "Does It Hurt" by her as well, and I didn't see any of those themes. It was significantly better, but this one, I don't know. There's
I
just
don't know.
something
I
off
mean,
about it.
it is definitely very much like, it's just like the vibes are not like there. You know what I mean? And I feel like almost now it's become almost like a meme to like be referencing this book because of like the scenes that are portrayed in this, like the gun scene. You know what I mean? Like he literally like unconsensually puts a gun into her and like it's loaded, and like I feel like first of all that does not promote gun safety at all, which is something that I think we as Marxists definitely promote, is gun safety and stuff like that, because we are pro like arms to the working class and stuff like that. So it's like not even something as that's like, I can't believe they mentioned guns in like this right wing story, but I just feel like it's usually like the right wing people. I think I'm very thankful that like since this is a dark romance, that men would not pick this up, because I feel like this could be like an incel like manifesto almost. You know what I mean?
Well, there was, I cannot remember his name, but the guy that was talking about like romance books, and he was getting into like romance books, and he said that he didn't agree with everything that happened in these books, and dark romance BookTok just ripped him to shreds over it. And
Really?
he's not wrong for the
And
content of it, to be like, hey, like this is not okay.
yeah.
Because mind you, like that gun scene happened after Adeline had gone out to a club and taken home this guy, and Zayd was like, hey, don't let him touch you. And then he ended up killing the guy, but it was done in like, oh well, he's abusive.
Yeah, like,
so
well,
I
it just so
saved
happened
you.
that you actually brought home an abuser that beats his wife. How, like, convenient. You know what I mean?
It's like,
Where it's
okay,
like,
that's great. I'm sure he would have been
but
shitty,
that's
but
why
that
you
doesn't
need to
make
go
you
to a
good.
re-education camp and not getting murdered. You know what I mean? We're not very
Send
much
him to the gulag.
we're not pro death penalty here. You know what I mean? I mean, like, the only reason why I could see that it was okay, because he was like some like rich businessman. You know what I mean? So like, but then
Well,
the
and
thing
like in the spoilers in the second
yeah.
book, he ends up being related to like the human trafficking trade. So
Oh,
like it
of
adds like
course. How
another,
convenient.
because
Like,
that's
it
like his brother gets upset, and that's who ends up taking Adeline and like selling her into the
yes.
trade.
Yeah, but because like that's how like the ending in the first book is, and I feel like that's one thing that like with H.G. Carlton, like maybe for your future books, if you're listening, don't put in the beginning this book ends on a cliffhanger. That's like book writing 101. Why would you say this book ends on a cliffhanger? It makes it so easy for people to guess the ending, where it's almost like I just like knew like something like you could just tell from like the way that it was like, oh well, I'm at this party where they're gonna sacrifice children, but oh no, he's not gonna get away with them sacrificing the children because it was actually a setup. You know what I mean? It feels very
Yeah.
much like, I don't know, it's like teenagery, like, you know what I mean? Like it sounds like somebody that like is very inexperienced with like planning out a story is. That's one thing where like I feel like I never rate BookTok books high at all. Like the highest rating, of course, like Six of Crows. I feel like is like that's like the shining like golden child of BookTok. That's like the only thing that I think is like worth the hype that it gets on BookTok. Everything else I feel like is just so like mid. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I've read a lot of them.
yeah, you've definitely read more than I do. Like that's all you do is read. I can't imagine like you don't consume any other media.
No, I don't watch TV. It sounds so boring. I don't watch TV. I don't really watch movies anymore.
You don't
And
play
I
video
just
games
read.
that often.
I've been playing Stardew this week. But that's about it. I read a lot. I've read like 170 books or something this year.
Which
So,
is an improvement of last year, because how many books did you read last
like
year?
20.
Yeah. Which I mean, like, I feel like I'm definitely probably the more average, like, BookTok consumer. I'm at, like, 30 books this year, I think, which I mean,
That's still a lot.
I mean, it's definitely a lot more than, like, most people don't even read, like, one book a year, but I feel like I'm probably more on pace with, like, the average BookTok user than you are.
Yeah. Because before, I mean, it was strictly nonfiction, and it was like 2 nonfiction books a month.
And I feel like that's one thing, like, I haven't, like, finished a nonfiction. Like, I started reading, like, Women Rights in Class, and, like, I've, like, always start them. My thing is always, like, finishing them. It is very hard to finish a nonfiction book, while finishing a fiction book is just, like, cake. I feel like, especially whenever you're reading, like, so much information, like, with nonfiction, is that you never really actually have to, like, finish the books to get all of, like, as much information, because it's just like reading like an article or something like that. Like once you get like the gist of it, you don't really necessarily, obviously, unless you want to get like the full scope of whatever you're reading, you do have to get to like that analysis points. But I do think even just reading like the beginning of a nonfiction book it's better than not reading any at all.
That being said, with reading so many books, I have also consumed a lot of horror erotica, and I think they should be reclassified under that, like Skeleton King that was going around, or like 8 Days to Salvation. I think it leans a lot more towards that way, which is like, yeah, because of the content of it. No, just like the general content, like especially when you think about like Hunting Adeline, where it starts off with her being like put into like the human trafficking trade, and then she makes like one mistake and she gets sexually assaulted, like very graphic.
That's why it
There was a
reminds
lot
me,
of details that were to me.
like the movie, The Sound of Freedom or whatever, that new movie that's like the QAnon movie.
Yes.
It's very much like, I remember like whenever that started, because that just came out this past summer, everyone was talking about it. I'm like, this is literally like Haunting Adeline, but like if the dude was ugly, I guess. So like that's why the men are consuming it. I just made a huge connection. Wow.
It is interesting with that movie being out, which I think it's still out right now.
It's probably still in like theaters, probably not as in big like theaters anymore, because it's definitely probably working towards like the streaming stuff, which is just really interesting to me, because like the controversies around that movie too were like the way that movie like instantly was portrayed to me, like whenever like I first started hearing stuff about it, was very much like, this is QAnon like propaganda, you know what I mean? This movie, they're like, this is like very negative, and this should not be like perpetuated as positive media. But then you go to the other side of TikTok where people are talking about this book and about how this is like some literary like exceptionally amazing like porn book that you could ever read, and it's not getting any of the same flack that like a movie is. And I don't know why that is. Like, I feel like that's,
I don't know, because like part of it, I think, with reading this genre as like feminist, I think it's important to explore things that are like deemed taboo, like with like the content of it, especially if you are somebody who has experienced sexual assault. I think which is honestly, it's like the vast majority of us.
yeah,
I really don't know of anyone in my life that hasn't been.
at least like whether or not it's not like super extreme sexual assault, but still like getting your ass smacked or something like that. That is still sexual assault.
Part of it might be just like exploring that concept in a safe manner, because it doesn't involve people and it's just fantasy. And I think it's good in that respect. But I don't think you should do that or read it with like the intention of this being like your new book boyfriend. This is not your Rezand.
And that's what I think, is that like, and I do think that maybe it wouldn't be portrayed that way, but then I just see so many women on TikTok that are like, there's like all the t-shirts and stuff that are like Zayd Meadows property or whatever, and it's like that just makes me feel so icky. Like, I get it, it's supposed to be like a jokey joke, but like it's almost like to the point where it's not a jokey joke anymore. We're like promoting this abuser and stuff like that, and I feel like thankfully that BookTok is majority women, so the fact that it's not going to, like, no man is going to see that and be like, oh, this is who I need to be like, you know what I mean? Because I feel like if this were to become into more popular culture within like a movie or a TV show or something like that, it would be very problematic for the masses.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see like people's reactions to like Tamlin's behavior and Akatar and Akamath, and how they think he is despicable.
He's the worst.
Worst.
Zayd
But
ever
then be like,
but then Zayd, yeah. Like, I feel like that's so crazy to me, because I feel like I remember being like, yeah, like it's Tamlin, like what he did was a very shitty thing to do as like a person, like locking her in like the castle and stuff. I guess spoilers for Akatar if you haven't read that. But like, I mean, I feel like this is very much early on. If you read anything on BookTok, you've read Akatar, I feel like, or you at least know like an amount about it. Like him locking her in the cat. Like, and the thing is, the first book, everyone's like, oh, we love Tamlin. He's like a perfect human being, you know. The second book, everyone changes because of like, and I wonder if that's just maybe more of how he's written, since he's more written as the villain. Like S.J. Maas like actually writes him as the villain, and so since he's written as the villain, it's maybe taken more of the negative than versus like Zayd is written as the hero in the story.
Which is such an interesting like turn of events. Like, he's like the hero of the story, saves her, and then helps her through her PTSD by being able to explore other things after the fact and like killing the people. And I think one of the most interesting parts of Hunting Adeline is the very end, when they get like the governor lady, and she's in the basement, and she's like, listen, we can work together and like create this fascist paradise. Like, we can be like the overlords of society. Like, they're all like a bunch of sheeple. Crazy shit. Like, I cannot make that up. Like, if you were just to read like the last bit of that book and just see like the thing, like their interaction is fascinating. But then Zayd doesn't ever take it far enough. Like, he has like this separationist idea where he's so hyper fixated on ending human trafficking without acknowledging the economic system that we live under, that would bring this into fruition.
Yeah. That's like pushing. There's a reason why like the rich people are in power and stuff like that, and especially like because I think this does like mirror like real life culture in that like a way that like the ruling class is the rich and stuff like that, and I feel like that is very clearly acknowledged in this series. But then the issue is that it then makes it into like weird right wing that like anybody that's not with us.
And it is precisely reiterating that like right wing, like the hashtag Save the Children, the anti-porn campaign, like all of that shit is like it's all in this book. With it being separationist, like if Zaid was truly the hero of this, he'd be a communist and he would be actively working on like transformative justice for himself and reconciling the problems that like he like all the damage that he caused to Adeline.
Yeah,
because like I don't care if like the human traffickers and like the bourgeoisie and the bureaucrats get killed, like whatever, but like come on,
like that's so like, well, because like the thing is that the fact that it's like, it's just like I feel like it's like, and it's so like just keep reiterating that like it is like this is like right wing propaganda and like viewing that like, oh, anybody that's in the government is bad because they're sexualizing children and stuff like that. Whenever like, especially with like people that are like Jeffrey Epstein that are constantly in the news and like his wife and like Elon Musk and stuff like that, that are like people that are known abusers, not even necessarily like child abusers in ways. And then the fact that it like perpetuates this is almost like, well, unless you're gonna go murder all of them, we're stuck.
Yeah, because like, you can never kill them all. If we live under an economic system that prioritizes profits over people, it doesn't matter that like Zaid is rich and he can fund this little light commune for like survivors. Like that's great, but it's not fixing. It's not attacking the root issue.
And I think this is one of those things that like it's like a very much like a plot device. Like, oh, Zaid just happens to be this very rich man so that he can like get away with all the legality behind it, so we don't have to worry about like the police searching, like actually trying to solve like, because like in reality, if this were to happen where there were like multiple like political figures getting murdered left and right, there would be a significant like manhunt in like, you know what I mean, like there would be so much more security around it.
And it's and like Zaid and like Z as like an organization almost is like a paramilitary type thing, because he's like funding it and he gets, I can't remember what he does. He does like, he gets paid by contractors to like go and assassinate people, and that's how he makes money, and then he distributes it. But I don't know if it's distributed equally, because it doesn't really get into that. It's just like, oh, we're paid well. It's like, but are you paid the full value of your labor? Are you unionizing Z?
Because like the thing is too, and I feel like it's just very much like for like plot standpoint, where it's just like, oh well, like the people that are funding this are behind the scenes, so we never hear or see anything about like the people that want these other people to assassinate. We're just supposed to hope that people that are part of the bourgeoisie actually want to do the right thing.
But in reality, it could be like competing like politicians, like
they're like, oh, I don't want to run this guy.
Like capitalists that are supporting like other people are like, oh no, go kill this guy for their own gain.
Not even because of the
is historically accurate. Like that does happen.
Like it's like, oh, I'm not actually killing him because he's a child trafficker. I want him dead because he's running against me and he might win.
As a means of like defaming and like disenfranchising them.
Well, because like the thing is too, and I don't know like why like Republicans are so obsessed with like child porn in general, and like they're always like, all of our children are getting raped by government officials, you know what I mean? Like they say that about like literally like it'll be like Joe Biden standing next to like a little girl and be like, you can tell that he took her to the back room, blah blah blah. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like,
it's like they have, and I think it ties back into like white supremacist ideology of like giving like voice to the voiceless, like these like imaginary people, because like, you can't see them, and that's like why people go on like mission trips or whatever, and like but people do it with like children, specifically like child trafficking, and like, oh, like porn is bad because a lot of it's like actually non-consensual and all of this. It's very weird. Like they have that mentality where they feel as though they need to go out and like save the world, vigilante, but they won't reflect or do any introspection on like patriarchy or capitalism or, you know, settler colonialism.
Yeah.
That's not important.
Yeah. Well, because like it's just so crazy to me too. Like it's just like why like the ideas of she's like, this just comes like the way that she writes like the trigger warning. She's like, this just came from my own fucked up mind from watching horror movies as a child. But like, I'm sorry, like I watched like Halloween as a kid and like Friday the 13th, and they don't like they're gory, but they're not like sitting here like, oh yeah, like there's actually child rapists. Like Jason is actually murdering like the child rapists. Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't even understand like, and that's why it just feels like it's so, especially because she didn't have that like at the beginning either, where she was like where she didn't have that trigger warning thing. It does feel like maybe she was maybe in some like right wing things, and then she wrote about them because she was like, oh yes, this is like justice, giving it to like explaining, like exposing the government for what it is. But then like I don't know, it's just like
I wish you would have attacked like labor trafficking, which is a really huge issue. And there are people with faces, they're adults who are brought here from
in
different countries in the United States, like
in Los Angeles. It's like the most sweatshops in like the world.
Exactly. You know, and then they're threatened with like being
you're gonna get your taken away or like get sent to ICE and stuff like that, where it's like there's actual like real world things that our government has done, whether or not it's like putting like Japanese people into like internment camps during World War II and stuff like that, where these are very like real traumas that are happening to people that you can actually like expose.
It's tangible, like you can see it, it's happening real time. And I think it reminds me of that book written by Sackett Stoney called like The Great Escape, where like all of these men that were brought over from India, like different regions in India, were made to work on like this oil rigging camp, and like they were living in squalor. It was awful. Their food was moldy and whatnot. And then they ended up like marching to like DC, and a lot of them ended up getting arrested, or there's just like all of this shit. And labor trafficking in particular makes up like something like 60% of all human trafficking. But it's so frustrating that that is never given any light. It is just like the children child. And I get it because like
that is an issue children. Yes, like that does happen to children. That's not something we're
but
denying.
Why not address the issue as like a whole?
But I think that's one thing too, is that like I feel like it's always like how like the right wing and they like to hyper focus on like one small issue and like perpetuate it as being a larger issue than what it actually is. I don't know if that makes them feel better about them like doing something, because like they don't actually like do anything, you know what I mean? So they're like highlighting like, oh, child trafficking, which is an issue, but then there's so much like there's like regular women being trafficking. I mean, look at like all the indigenous women that are missing still, you know what I mean, from Canada and stuff like that, which are like real world things that have happened that like do not get the same light of day as like this child trafficking issue where like children are getting sent to the Philippines to get raped. You know
and there's even like young women who get into relationships with older men and end up being like groomed into being like owned by a pimp. That's usually who they end up being, and then sold like into that. And because they're like sex workers and prostitution is a federal crime, they end up getting in trouble. Like they can't.
I think there's a YouTuber that actually like this happened. What was her? It was like Brittany Taylor is her name, and she got into a relationship with this guy. Like this actually like really happened to her, and like she ended up having a kid with him and stuff, and like he was trying to like marry her, and I think they did end up getting married, but he was gonna like sell her off to like, he was like, oh, like let's go to like some part of Europe or whatever where my family lives or whatever, and then like he was gonna like sell her off to like some people, and thankfully she was like able to get away with her son because like her family and stuff like that. But then it's just like these are like real issues that happen, not the government killing children in their basement and drinking their blood to stay young or whatever they think is happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost like and then it's like adding in that supernatural aspect of it where it's like, no, I don't think any like logical person is going to think that, oh, me drinking children's blood is going to make me young again.
Mind you, all of this is happening at the same time that her house is haunted.
Yeah, they don't even. Yeah, and she has to solve her grandmother's murder, who was possibly murdered by her stalker, but then she ends up being murdered by her husband, or not her husband, her husband's friend,
who was the senator's dad.
but then he was also like a sheriff or something too.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it's just like,
it's a very
so close yet so far.
Anytime that would come up, it pulled me out of the whole experience too. It was like, wait, this is so. It's like it almost felt like there's too much happening all at once.
Yes, and I do think like with it being a duology, which I mean, like, thank God she didn't write any more of these books. Because I swear to God, if there was another one of these, it would be like. But I feel like almost like having like the whole thing with like the mystery behind her grandma. I don't know if that's like something that was just like to get more people to read the story or something like that, to make it more of like a mystery, so then that you could be like having your toes dipped into all the different genres that are like
perfect. I feel like it could have very easily ended with the first book and it would have been fine, but then maybe towards the end of it she decided that she wanted to write more about it.
Yeah.
And then also like build on Sibby's character, which in Hunting Adeline is like a whole other.
I don't even know who that is.
She was the girl from Satan's Affair, the doll.
Oh, the little girl. I know. I just like viewed her as like a young girl, like ish. But she
suffers from like delusions or something.
Illness. Yeah.
And she talks to people and she has orgies with her
ghost friends.
I don't know but she knows it's haunted, like the house is haunted. It's very confusing. I know that Satan's Affair, like the book, is about her, and I think the new book that she is writing that is coming out is also about her. So I don't know.
And I feel like that's like almost like a like unsettling thing, because like I feel like this is very clearly like a mentally ill like character, where like she has like, I don't know if this may be supposed to be like schizophrenia and like ways that she's like seeing like other people and stuff like that aren't actually like there. You know what
I mean? I didn't like that because I think it's supposed to be like, I don't remember what the term they use now for multiple personality disorder. I know that goes, or DID. It's like dissociative.
Yeah. But like it kind of reminds me, do you know like in American Horror Story Asylum there's like that character Pepper? It kind of like gives me like those kind of vibes, and I never felt like Pepper is like a character is like a positively like reference like character, you know what I mean? It's almost just like a like, oh, look at this crazy girl doing crazy things, how quirky, you know what I mean? And I feel like it's almost like putting mental illness and like oh, it's just a silly little quirk that makes everyone act a little kooky sometimes, you know what I mean? Instead of like truly discussing like, why was this little girl even like a part of this like weird circus event, you know what I mean?
But also I think she's an adult. I think she is, right?
I think she's supposed, I assume she was like a younger adult, like maybe I was viewing like 18, 19 sort of like age, like because like it said that like she like murdered her dad or something like that, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah, like, she was part of a big old commune.
Like cult. She was like a
part that of a had cult like 40 kids or something crazy. So she has like, all of these siblings.
But I know like she like her whole thing is that she was like raised in a cult or something, and she like got out of the cult. That was like her thing. And I feel like
that's all I remember though.
I don't know. It's such a like, it just seems like so much is going on. Like I feel like it was like you can tell that this is somebody that is not a seasoned writer in any way, which I mean, like, it's fine. Like, obviously, nobody's first works are going to be.
And the second book, especially, like, the first one is significantly better written. Like, it feels more complete. The second one, it ends and it feels very incomplete.
Really?
Yeah, because, like, Sibby ends up just dipping, like, leaving randomly with some random dude that's, like, knows her.
Oh,
and then they get engaged, like, Adeline and Zaid. Not that she has a choice. But
yeah. And that's one thing, like, he always talks about like having children with her, like, and then it's like people make fun of like the Twilight timeline. I feel like as bad as Edward Cullen is, there's definitely tiers of how bad men are, especially in BookTok. And I feel like Edward Cullen is not even on like the scale of like any of these people. Like, yeah, he's a shitter, but he's not that shitty if you compared him to someone like Zaid. You have like literally an abuser, and then there's like, I feel like, and that's the thing, is that so many people are so much more critical of like people like the more like good bad guys, I guess, like the people that have less like critiques to make of them. It's almost like people are more critical of them than they are of like very clearly like evil people.
You know like I mean? Zaid is objectively not a good guy.
Yeah, and like obviously like Edward Cullen is not like the perfect book boyfriend either, you know what I mean? And even like Rhysand in like the ACOTAR series is not like the perfect man, but then like Tamlin is so much like, at least on BookTok, is so much more like worse regard. Like you would be like, if you were to be like, oh, I think Tamlin is better than Zaid, you'd probably get so many like hate comments.
Should do a thought experiment before we post this.
Yeah,
and
just like make a post.
I'll post it and just see what happens.
Opinion. I think Tamlin was not that bad, and
I can only imagine the reception.
I don't know, but I feel like, and that's one thing, is that like I feel like almost like it's kind of getting to the point to me where I guess so many more people have read Haunting Adeline and they kind of realize how shit the book
is. It's getting there.
Yeah. But like the thing is that like I was talking to somebody that I know in real life and they read Haunting Adeline, like they started it before and they're like, oh my god, it's so good. And I was like, well, I know it's like supposed to be like pretty problematic. And she's like, yeah, well, it's bad. And like I know that he's like a shitty person, but it's like I'm still rooting for them to end up together. And like I read that and I was like, I want this man to say, I need her to go fill out a restraining order and make sure that he can't be within 300 feet of her at any given point of the day. And
you know, so she has the opportunity to kill him at one point and she doesn't. Like she's having like a mental breakdown, has the gun, she's pointing it at him because she's like sick of his shit after like being rescued and whatnot. And he's just like, well, just do it because there's no living without you. And she doesn't. That would have been baller if she just committed.
And I feel like, I don't know, it's just such a negative like relationship to like, especially to be in game to get their happily ever after.
Is it there or is it his
happily ever? Yeah. And I feel like that's one thing too, is that like she's like abused, you know what I mean? And that's why she like ends up in this like traumatic situation where she ends up with this horrible man, you know, like all throughout the first book is like, oh, I shouldn't be with her, blah blah blah, she deserves someone so much better. Like, yeah, she does, maybe you should let her have that, like, go ahead, you can do it. It's just like a crazy story overall that I feel like it's very interesting to me that this is what is like the height of literary BookTok books, whenever I feel like there's probably so many other better romances that just like haven't been.
But it's just so strange how it can range from like twisted love to like this
as like a dark romance category.
It's hard because there's like no real wiggle room there where it's like dark romance, but it's not like I would like something that was like a notch down from this, and I think it would be like perfect because like it's fine, like the dubious consent CNC or whatever, and I feel like that sick love does a better job at it, like the stalker romance, and it's just one book. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he violates her in any way that like Zaid did.
Yeah, well, because like the thing is that like, especially because I feel like that's not even something that she really like in her like trigger warnings is like, hey, like saying like, hey, if you are like a woman, like, yeah, your mental health matters. It's like all she says, but she doesn't like explain that this is like a negative way to portray a relationship. Like, hey, if you're a young girl reading this, do not look at the hero, like do not look at Zaid and view him as like a positive male figure in any way, shape, or form. And I feel like that's all like the BookTok books, and I don't know if it's like maybe like a parallel just because like men suck in general, because like I feel like Ugly Love has it where there's like a shitty dude,
and even like in There Are No Saints, and then I can't remember what the second one is, which is another like stalker romance. It's still better, but it's not great.
Yeah,
like they're just toxic, but not.
And that's like Penelope Douglas too. Like I read Punk 57, and that one is like another like bully romance is like a whole like thing where it's just like the male character berates the female character and like makes her feel like a horrible person whenever she's just like existing as like a woman. And they always end up together and are like, why would I want this? You know?
And I feel like that is why monster romance is such a interesting book category, because it's like a bunch of golden retrievers, but sometimes because they're not human, they don't act, they don't know any better, so it's excusable, their behavior. Mm-hmm. But they're like willing to make up for it and do better. And I feel like it's a very underrated, like it's a niche part of BookTok,
like Iceman and Barbarians and stuff like that. Well, because like what even is like other like monster romances besides like it was IPB. Is that how you say the acronym?
Ice Planet Barbarians. There's like any of like the offshoots that she's written. There was the one, the sleep paralysis demon. I cannot remember what the author's name.
Tell me about that.
That one was solid.
The sleep paralysis.
And then there's like a Soul to Keep.
I don't know.
Like
I feel
the
like
skull. I don't even know what they are. They're called
it's
like
just like crazy to me. It's just like everything. Like I feel like there's no way to have an original idea on BookTok because like they've written for everything. Like anything, like whether or not it's on AO3 or like a traditionally published book, you can find pretty much anything that you've ever fantasized about written down. So
I'm not saying maybe that's why this book in particular probably took off the way that it did and has gotten so much traction and like such a big fan base, is because it really isn't anything that you would see at Barnes and Noble and like.
But it is a Barnes and Noble now. That's what's so crazy.
I remember like going to Barnes and Noble and it was like all of the like Fabio type.
Yeah, I like Nora Roberts writer.
Mm-hmm.
And, like,
Nora Roberts, all of those like old lady books.
And I feel like almost like I haven't read any of those just because like I was a child whenever like I saw those. Whenever you're a kid, you see that, you're like, ew, it's a man on the cover. I'm not reading that. I wonder like what those compares like romance, like smutty romances, because I don't even assume that they even have that much like smut. Do they?
I don't know.
No. I don't know, because like I'm wondering like comparing like back then from like the 90s and like the 80s, and even because there's like that scene from like that 70s show where like Kitty's reading like the sex book and she's like, it's not a sex book, it's a romance, blah blah blah, like the and then he's like, okay, and then like it really is like a sex book. So I wonder how much they actually like put into
I think
that.
A lot of it was like probably Fade to Black, where they kind of like talked about leading up, like, and then like maybe reminiscing, like, oh, reminded me of his caresses or something silly.
Yeah, I don't know, because then it's just so crazy because you think like reading like a Nora Roberts book and then going into like this is
like I would never give this to my mother.
No,
never.
No way, Jose. That's the thing, is that even like I don't know, because I feel like, and I don't know, I don't think I would even like most BookTok books I feel like are not worth like recommending either. Like I would not recommend for anybody to read this book unless you like hated yourself.
I don't think I've ever recommended it to anybody, to be honest.
Know,
like to think of it.
But then everybody on like TikTok is recommending. Like I saw somebody with the stupid audio that's like, and if I like you, these are the books I would recommend to you. And Haunting Adeline is right up there. It's like, this is like your idea of like literature. This is what you would recommend for someone to read, like to go out of their way and sit there for hours at a time to put these images in their brain. That doesn't seem like you like me if that's what you want me to read.
If you want a book to give you something to think about for the rest of your life, because some of those scenes it just don't
be traumatized. Maybe
it's an experience that I won't ever reread. I don't think I'll ever reread them. I don't have a desire to. I don't even think
it's worth it rereading. And we didn't even like go into like Hawk on TikTok either, like going into like the OnlyFans like part of it, like how they have like the specific like rights to like the porn behind it or whatever. And I feel like portraying that on like, obviously like since it'll be because they're doing it with like their consensual like OnlyFans account, that I feel like if that was something that was like put onto Pornhub or something like that, it could be so like perpetuated in such like a negative light.
Yeah, I mean there's already like a plethora of like that type of
porn on Pornhub and stuff like that in general. And there's even like
with Hawk, what I know is it's going to be a lot of the scenes where it is consensual. And Hawk has addressed it several times, saying that it's a fantasy. It's not real. It really emphasizes the point, like, it's not fucking real. I don't want this in real life. It's just interesting to read.
And I think that's something that I don't think H.G. Carlton did a good enough job explaining, that, like, this is not something you should look for in a relationship, like, at all. Like, if you see a man like this, run the fucking opposite direction. Do not, like, embrace this into your home. And that's one thing that I think, like, Adeline is probably one of the stupidest main characters ever. She's just like, I'm not going to call the police, which we know, like, the police is stupid. So like they only solve like what, like
11% of crime. Exactly. It's like even less. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like something crazy low, and like obviously, but then the thing is that like the fact that you still like, I don't know, don't move, at least even like get like the court system involved, where like you can, there's like so many, and not to like victim blame or anything like Adeline, but I do think that there's definitely like, because she has like, there's definitely steps that you can take where like if you were in a situation like this, you can do stuff about it to hopefully like protect your safety. Because like she had that one friend, I can't remember her name, is it Dana or something like that?
I think so.
Where like she was very clearly like, hey, come stay over at my house whenever like
she's like, I can't leave my house. Like, you know what, I would have just bought a shotgun, I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah,
I started blasting. She lives out in the country. This country rules.
She had literally like her backyard is half forest.
Like, get the fuck off my property.
On the forest, bro, that was so.
Honestly, couldn't be me. The dirt and the twigs getting in my crevices. Crevices.
He was like holding her up against a tree or something. That'd be so uncomfortable. And then afterwards, they didn't even do it back in the bed. They went into her car and did it, or his car, somebody's car. And like he tied her up with the seatbelts. And he like buckled them in so she can get out. Like, it's just like, what?
It's creative.
It definitely is. But I feel like, I don't know. Such a crazy like series. And I think that's one thing that like is so, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know what to say about it. It's just like such a wild like thought someone had. Where they were like, I see all these QAnon theories all over Facebook and like all over Twitter.
It's like letting the intrusive thoughts win.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything closing you maybe want to say?
I feel like if you wanted to read a piece of her work that isn't this, like, Does It Hurt is going to be a better option. Because there is a scene of like dubious consent, which I think is much better. And it's like enemies to lovers. It's spooky. It's really
enemies
weird.
To lovers, or like the female character is getting berated by the male character the whole time?
No, the female character is like an antagonist.
Okay.
At the beginning, like it talks about it. Like she steals the guy's identity.
Okay.
And then he's just like, what the fuck? And like, so yeah, it's like him trying to like get back at her, and then they get stuck on an island with a light. Okay. But yeah, it's very interesting. Maybe you can read that one next. I don't want to get too into it.
I don't know about that. I don't know. I feel like I need to wait like at least like a year before I read anything else written by her. Because like, it's like sickening. Like there's like times where like your stomach gets like queasy reading it. You know, like,
oh yeah,
you know what I mean? But he's just like, I can't believe somebody like took the time to write this out on paper. An editor read over it and was like, yes, let's put this on Kindle Unlimited for just about anybody to consume.
And like looking back on it now, it's just like thinking and trying to find like some sort of like pleasure or enjoyment in media about like violence against women. It's just, I don't think it's a good time. Like, it's one of those things, if you've never read it and you're like curious about it, like maybe read it so you can understand like why I say that.
I feel like the hype
a lot
around
of fucked up shit, and that's just,
that's like the cherry on top of like most fucked up shit you could read.
It's like I'm already living in like a patriarchal, like a cis heteropatriarchal.
I already don't want to go walking at night. I don't want to read this and be worried about some dude coming in my house and raping me with a gun. You know, can't even go walking down the street at night. Like,
well, it's like, and the reality is of it all is you're likely to get like assaulted by somebody that you know.
I know.
So this is like reiterating that at another point of like right wing propaganda.
Yeah. Because, like, in the way that, like, there's, like, one point wherever, like, the senator dude, like, takes a picture of her and it's like, oh, she's already been being tracked about getting kidnapped at some point. Like, it's some, like, whole plan thing. And she's like, I did everything right. And it wasn't even, like, she acted that, like, there are ways that she could have prevented, like, getting into it. And she was like, this is all Zayd's fault that I'm getting human trafficked. It's like a goofy story. Like, it's so goofy to me.
It is. It's silly at times. There's like a lot of silly things, and like him making her go to like dinner with him.
And why does he get a point of view in this book? Why is that? Do you think that maybe made it so that more people identified with him? Maybe not necessarily identified. I guess maybe viewed him in more
Zayd apologetics.
Yeah, because like in ACOTAR, you don't get Tamlin's point of view at all. You know what I mean? You just get Farrah's like objective point of view. And so I wonder if maybe giving him like his own voice in it makes it so that people are more likely
you can like rationalize like why he's doing what he's doing.
Because like since they're both very unreliable narrators, their opinions is God's way. Like this is like what is like being like whatever she says happens is what's happening. You know, obviously objectively is probably not exactly what is happening because it's going to be a skewed perspective.
But in this instant, like the majority of it, like she's a victim. Like, honey, you're a victim.
Yeah. She is a victim. The thing is, the only thing like at the beginning, I feel like she's not victim, and then she like, I don't know if it's like the way that H.G. Carlton like wants like sort of like the savior complex sort of thing, and like a man maybe that makes it so that she's, I don't know, that he's more well regarded. You know, just because like you're a man and you do one good thing does not make it so that.
Like, goddamn, the bar is in hell. Like.
Yeah, like women do not have to have sex with you just because you did one thing for them either. Like just because you saved a woman from human trafficking does not obligate her to get married to you. Unless you're Zayd Meadows, of course, I guess.
I don't think I have any other thoughts. I feel like we covered most everything.
I'm not going to recommend reading this to you, even if you're like curious about it. I feel like you could probably find a TikTok where they like talk about it or something, but I do not buy this book. I would recommend if there's anything, you can find a PDF online. It's free on Kindle Unlimited if you have that. Do not go out of your way and purchase this book and read it. I don't think, like, if you want to purchase some of her other books, maybe, I don't know. I feel like, and it's just so crazy to me because I feel like cancel culture is such a, like a big thing, and the fact that like this is what's popular on BookTok, and like she has no like ramifications of what she's written.
And I don't know if you remember, because I know I'm older than you, but when the movies for 50 Shades of Grey were coming out, like there was a huge backlash for them being turned into films. People were saying like it's anti-feminist, like it's violence against women that's being glorified and commodified. And I've read all of those books, and he is not nearly
like, he's a billionaire, Mariah.
Yeah, he is a billionaire. But so is Zayd. How are you going to be
Gray or whatever
and shitty?
Like, yeah. Well, because like I don't know that much. I just know like mostly because like I was old enough. I saw the first Twilight movie in theaters. Like I'm still like old enough for that. It's just like I was in high school, I think, whenever like the 50 Shades of Grey movies started coming out. So it's like I was like a high schooler, and like I was reading like John Green. I was not going to be reading 50 Shades of Grey, and I was very much like in my I'm not like other girls, so I'm not reading Twilight phase. I read Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. Like I was definitely more of like I guess I don't know, like it was very much like internalized like anti-feminism and stuff like that. Especially I feel like being at that age, that's something that like I feel like most, at least like girls that were like on Tumblr and stuff like that.
So I'm not like other girls.
I'm not like other girls. I don't read popular women books like Twilight. I read Harry Potter, you know, not popular at all. Male character, turf author book, you know. I feel like J.K. Rowling has dug herself a grave. That lady has. They canceled the rest of her movies that she was like writing that were like in the Harry Potter universe.
Oops.
Yeah.
And sucks to be a bigot.
For real. It's just so crazy to me that like, especially with like being so online though, is that like why is like somebody like J.K. Rowling getting canceled like for like obviously being like a terrible person, but then somebody that's writing like QAnon fan fiction is like, this is literature. You know,
it's the reception around it. And I think it was more controversial like when it first came out, because I was going through Reddit posts that were like around the time it had come out, and it seemed like a lot of people didn't like it. They're like, I wish I would have DNF'd this. I didn't spend the time to read it all. But I think that's just like with BookTok. It's a very scary vehicle.
with BookTok being young women mostly. Like, the thing is that, like, there are very few men on BookTok. And I feel like the spaces that at least, like, BookTok men are in, they're not in the same, like, dark romance or, like, any type of romance, like, section of BookTok. Because, like, there's BookTok as a whole, but then there's so many, like, subcategories. Because you have, like, the SJM girlies, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many subcategories that fall under, like, there's even, like, classic section where people talk about, like, Pride and Prejudice and stuff like that.
I just hope that they know, like, regardless of, like, what dark romance book it is, it's not something that women want.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for funsies to read.
And I think even if you, like, read this book and enjoyed it, I don't think that there's any way that, like, that's negatively on your character or anything like that either. If you're like, oh, this is a good book, which, I mean, like, I don't think objectively it's, like, a good book, but I do think it's something that, like,
it's entertaining.
Yeah, it's definitely, like, watching, like, some fucked up movie. Like, almost like, what are those, like, horror films and stuff that are, like
Terrifier and stuff? Like, are you talking about, like, those?
There's, like, the ones that are, like, I don't remember what they're called. There's, like, a name for, like, these, like, subgenre of, like, horror films and stuff that are sort of, like, fucked up, but they're, like Tusk, you know, Human Centipede, like that, like, whatever that sort of genre is, because, like, nobody's watching those movies and are like, these are good movies, you know what I mean? People are watching.
You don't think, like, the Human Centipede is good,
but they're watching it for, like, the spectacle of it.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I do think, like, if you enjoyed the book in that way, that's fine. But I just also think that, like, making sure it's very abundantly clear that, like, Zaid is a terrible human being, book being, whatever you want to call him, and that, like, he should not be perpetuated and, like, put on the pedestal that he is put on, that, like, the internet has put him on. And that's why I will reiterate this point. I am so thankful that, like, BookTok is not a men's space, like, at all. Like, there's men there, but it's a very
for the girls, gays, and theys.
Yeah, because I do think that, like, this could be, like, a Sound of Freedom book. It could be, like, that whole, like, in that space, like, right-winger conspiracy theory. Like, I'm worried that, like, they'll read this, like, all of those, like, Holocaust deniers read this and are like, this is actual history happening. I don't have any other thoughts, really. What do you want to do for next podcast?
Perfect Marriage.
We're going to do The Perfect Marriage and another BookTok book. I don't think this one is nearly as popular as Haunting Adeline, but I do think it does have also some very controversial ideas in it, and not in, like, a positive way in any way, shape, or form. So if you haven't read The Perfect Marriage, I actually recommend that over this book. I think you should read The Perfect Marriage, just because it's very short. It's way shorter too. It's only, like, 300 something pages versus this, like, 600 something monstrosity. And so I literally read The Perfect Marriage in one night. I started reading it at, like, 7 p.m. and I finished at, like, 1 a.m.
Make sure to follow either our personals or, like, the podcast.
Yeah, we'll have all our social media platforms. We'll have all of our social media listed. I'm at KRXXTXN on all socials. Rye is at Hungry Rye on everything.
Yeah, and I think we're open to criticism on format. We aren't holding we don't have any sort of outline that we want to, like, maintain a rough or hard outline that we're going to do for every episode. So if anyone has any suggestions,
book recommendations that you would love for us to talk about, definitely open to those. We do have plenty of other series planned that we have read and actually enjoyed. We're not going to be hating on books every podcast.
No, this was just a fun one because I knew it grinded Kristen's gears.
It's just such a...
I read it and you had to read it. You couldn't just suffer alone.
You read it and you were like, this is so good, you have to read it. I was like, well, I have been seeing it all over BookTok. I guess I'll check it out. It must be pretty decent if so many people are enjoying it.
Hey, hindsight is 20/20, right?
I read it and I was like, this is literally, like, the worst thing I could have ever consumed in my life. This is my lowest rated book of this year. The second lowest is Throne of Glass, so that's my controversial take of the day. We're gonna get all of the SJM girlies in here. I wonder, let me see what the average rating of Haunting Adeline is on Goodreads. What do you think it is?
I think it's like a 4.5.
4.4. 4.04. That's so crazy to me that it's rated so high.
I'm gonna go back through and readjust my ratings.
Yeah, because you still
now that I've read a lot
in here. You still have 5 stars on this one. You read it 3 months ago, it said.
Was it only 3 months ago? It feels like it was so long ago.
So May.
Oh my God. I felt like it was like a lifetime ago.
That's what it says. It says.
I guess that's what happens when you read a lot of books. They all kind of.
It says March, but then you rated it May 17th.
How weird.
I don't know why you did it like that. Shelved as read. Questionable dark romance. That's what this book is, this series.
Questionable dark romance.
Yeah, a lot more than questionable, I'd say, but